17 years. That's how long I had walked through those same glass doors every morning, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a quiet sense of pride in the other. 17 years of loyalty, of late nights, of skipped vacations, of giving my all to a company I once believed was family. I knew every corner of that office, every sound of the elevator, every hum of the machines, every sigh that came from overworked colleagues. It wasn't just a job, it was part of my life. But that morning, something felt different. The air was thick. The usual smiles from coworkers were replaced by quick glances and silence. I noticed it immediately, that awkward energy that fills a room when people know something you don't. I brushed it off, telling myself maybe it was just another stressful week. I had no idea that in a few hours, everything I'd built for 17 years would be ripped away in a single sentence. At around 10 a.m., I got the message. "Can you step into the conference room?" No reason, no explanation, just that one line. I walked in expecting a routine discussion, maybe a new project or a schedule change. But when I entered, I saw three people sitting across the table, the HR manager, the new boss, and a legal advisor I'd never seen before. My stomach turned. The new boss, a man who'd been in the company for barely 3 months, didn't even look at me properly. He had that cold expression people wear when they've already decided something and just want to get it over with. He cleared his throat and said it like he was reading from a script. "We're eliminating your position. Please pack your things." That was it. No warning. No meeting before this. No, thank you, for nearly 2 decades of service. Just those words. For a second, I couldn't move. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. I looked at him, this man who didn't even know half of what I'd done for this company, and all I could do was smile. Not because I was fine, but because I already knew something they didn't. Everyone in that room probably thought I was too shocked to react. But the truth was, I had seen this coming weeks ago. The new boss had been making quiet changes, moving loyal employees out, replacing them with his own people. I had watched it all unfold silently, and while they thought I was just another name on the list, they didn't know I had access to something far more powerful than my job title. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask for an explanation. I stood up, smiled politely, and said, "Thank you." Then I walked out. My colleagues looked confused as I passed by, carrying only my small office plant and a folder I'd kept hidden in my drawer for months. No one realized what I was carrying. No one knew what was in that folder. That folder held every detail of the company's wrongdoings, the financial discrepancies, the mistreatment of staff, the silent manipulations that upper management thought no one had noticed. I'd been documenting it all for years, not because I wanted revenge, but because something inside me told me that one day, the truth would matter. And that day had finally arrived. When I stepped out of the building, the cold wind hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. It was strange. Being fired should have felt humiliating, devastating even. But it didn't, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something much bigger. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, I replayed every moment from the past few months. The late-night emails, the secret meetings, the fake smiles. I remembered how the new boss had come in acting like a savior, promising change and efficiency, when in reality, he was cleaning house to make space for his own team. I wasn't just another employee to him. I was a reminder of the company's old values, the kind he wanted gone. But he underestimated one thing. Loyalty doesn't just disappear. It leaves traces, and I had those traces all documented, neatly organized and ready. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No one reached out. I could almost hear the whispers behind closed doors. Some said I was broken. Others said I'd taken it badly. But what they didn't know was that I was working, not for them, but for myself now. I was building something they never expected. You see, that Friday was the board meeting. And I had a plan. I knew who would be there, what would be discussed, and more importantly, what truths would be ignored. I had the evidence. I had the dates, the numbers, the documents that could shake the entire company's foundation. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning justice. As Friday approached, I felt no fear. Just calm determination. The kind that comes when you know you're about to take back your power. I watched the news that morning, drank my coffee slowly, and smiled as the clock ticked toward noon. Inside that boardroom, they thought they were safe. They thought getting rid of me had erased the problem. But what they didn't realize was that they had just set the stage for their own downfall. Because when the meeting started, an email was scheduled to go out, not just to the board, but to the media, to the shareholders, and to every department head in the company. That email contained everything they had tried to hide. The funny part, they fired me thinking I'd walk away quietly, but they never knew what I was holding. And as I sat back, watching the clock hit 12, I smiled, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because sometimes, losing your job doesn't mean losing your worth. Sometimes, it means finding your voice. They took my title. They took my position. But they forgot they couldn't take my truth. And when that truth finally came out, everything changed. When the clock struck 12, I felt my phone buzz gently against the table. That was the signal. The email had gone out. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had spent weeks preparing every detail, attachments, timestamps, and proof. Every word carefully chosen, every fact double-checked. It was the quietest kind of storm, and now it had just started to unfold. I sat back on my couch, the faint sound of the city outside my window. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath with me. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. All those years of silent endurance, all those nights where I stayed late fixing someone else's mistake, had led to this moment. Yet, instead of feeling victorious, I felt something else, something more complicated. It's strange how quickly a place you gave your life to can turn against you. I still remembered my first day at the company. I was nervous, young, and full of ambition. Back then, the company had been small, more like a family. My first boss, Mr. Daniels, used to walk around the office cracking small jokes and asking how everyone's kids were doing. There was warmth then, respect. But over time, the warmth turned into cold deadlines, the laughter into silence, and the people into numbers. When Mr. Daniels retired, everything changed. The company was bought out by a larger firm, and new management started cleaning out what they called old systems. I was part of those old systems. They saw me as someone who belonged to the past, someone too loyal to question, too trusting to resist. That's what made me easy to target, but they didn't know that I was paying attention all along. The first red flag came when the accounting team started whispering about budget discrepancies. I remember one of them, Sarah, coming to me with worry in her eyes. She told me she'd found inconsistencies in reports approved by upper management, but when she raised it, she was told to leave it alone. A week later, she was transferred to another branch, hundreds of miles away. That's when I started keeping notes. Quietly, carefully. At first, it was just small things. A missing signature here, an expense report that didn't add up, an unusual payment to a vendor no one had ever heard of. But then it grew. I noticed patterns. Every quarter, a large sum of money was redirected to consulting fees for a firm that didn't exist. I tried to ask around, but no one wanted to talk. People were afraid. The atmosphere had changed. Everyone walked on eggshells. Then came a new boss. His name was David. Young, polished, confident. The kind of man who smiled too much in meetings but listened too little. He came in promising innovation, restructuring, and a new era of transparency. I remember how some employees believed him, how they clapped during his first speech. I didn't. There was something about his tone, something rehearsed, something hollow. Over the next few months, David made his moves. Department heads who questioned him were quietly replaced. Policies were rewritten. Access to internal data became restricted. It was all done subtly, like pieces on a chessboard being moved one at a time. And through it all, I stayed silent, pretending not to notice, pretending to be the obedient employee. What they didn't realize was that my position, though small, gave me access to areas they had overlooked. I managed internal reports, client documentation, and archive correspondence. Everything passed through my desk at some point. And while they thought I was simply doing my routine work, I was saving copies of everything, in encrypted drives, hidden folders, and old flash drives no one paid attention to anymore. I didn't plan on using them. Not at first. I told myself I was just protecting myself. But then, one evening, I overheard something that changed everything. David was in the boardroom late, speaking on the phone. The lights were dim, and I had come back to retrieve a file I'd left on my desk. I froze when I heard his voice. He was speaking in a low tone, but I caught enough words to piece it together. "No, they don't know yet," he said. "We'll finalize the transfer next week. Once the merger is approved, the rest won't matter." I didn't understand everything, but I knew something big, and probably illegal, was happening. And that was the moment I decided I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing together the puzzle. The consulting firm receiving payments was just a front. Money was being siphoned out of company accounts under false invoices and redirected into private holdings tied to David and 2 other senior executives. It was fraud, plain and simple. The kind that could destroy lives and take down the entire company. But I was careful. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't speak about it to anyone, not even to my closest colleagues. Instead, I built a timeline, collected proof, and quietly started backing up everything. Every document, every signature, every transaction. It took months. When the layoffs began, I knew my time was coming. David wanted no traces of the old team left behind. But by then, it didn't scare me anymore. I already had what I needed. So, when he called me into that room and said, "We're eliminating your position," I almost felt relieved. Because it meant I no longer had to pretend. It meant I was free to act. The hours after sending that email felt endless. I kept imagining what was happening inside the boardroom, the confusion, the anger, the shock. I imagined David's expression when he realized that the one person he underestimated was the one who could bring everything crashing down. But even then, a part of me wasn't sure how I felt. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth. It was fairness. For years, I'd watched good people lose their jobs, take the blame for mistakes they didn't make, while those at the top walked away clean. I wasn't going to let that continue. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an old colleague, Mark, someone who had left the company 2 years earlier. He had seen the email. "You did this, didn't you?" he wrote. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The evening news mentioned the company, a developing internal investigation. They called it. Shareholders were demanding answers. The board was calling an emergency session. I watched it all unfold quietly from my apartment, sitting by the window as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. It was strange. The company looked so peaceful from the outside. The tall glass tower stood gleaming in the distance, hiding the chaos brewing inside. I thought about the people still working there, the assistants, the junior analysts, the ones who had no idea what was happening above them. They didn't deserve the fallout. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. Because no matter what David and his team had done, I knew this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone who'd been silenced, everyone who'd been told they didn't matter. And somewhere deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. The real storm was still coming. And the next move wasn't going to come from me. Inside the company, the silence after the email hit was almost eerie. Phones stopped ringing. Keyboards stopped clicking. People stared at their screens, reading the same message over and over again, unsure what to do next. The subject line was short and direct. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just a few words that carried the weight of a truth no one had seen coming. In the boardroom, David froze mid-sentence as his laptop chimed. For a moment, he thought it was just another reminder. But then the notifications began stacking up, one after another. Messages from shareholders, department heads, and even journalists started flooding his inbox. The HR manager sitting beside him glanced over, her face pale as she read the same message on her tablet. Across the table, the legal advisor whispered, "You need to see this." David opened the email. It was simple, factual, impossible to ignore. Attached were dozens of documents, invoices, bank statements, memos, all pointing to transactions that shouldn't have existed. The evidence was laid out neatly, with clear explanations and timestamps. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of truth. And at the bottom, one quiet line that made his hands tremble. You should have checked who was watching. No name, no signature, but he knew exactly who it was from. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his coffee. The room was dead silent. Everyone was waiting for him to speak, but for once, he had no words. He grabbed his phone and stepped out, his face tightening as he scrolled through the flood of calls and messages. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, the news was spreading through the building like wildfire. People whispered in the hallways, eyes darting toward closed office doors. Some were scared, others secretly relieved. There had been tension in the company for months, and now it had a face, or at least a trigger. In the IT department, an employee named Clara was trying to trace where the email came from. She was good at her job, quiet, observant, and fiercely loyal to her work. She had no idea what was happening, but something inside her told her this wasn't just a random leak. As she dug deeper, she realized the sender had covered their tracks perfectly. The email had come from an encrypted server, routed through multiple layers, impossible to trace directly. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. David stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him. His assistant, nervously holding a stack of files, froze in the doorway. "Sir, the press," she began, but he cut her off with a glare. "Not now." His mind was racing. He knew the documents were real. He'd approved some of those transactions himself, believing no one would notice. But how did this person get them? How much did they know? He thought back to the past few months, the employees he'd let go, the ones who left quietly without a fight. Then it hit him, her. The long-serving staff member who had worked in records and compliance. The one who never argued, never complained, always had that quiet composure. He remembered her calm smile the day she was fired. It wasn't the smile of someone defeated. It was the smile of someone who had already won. Outside, the board was in chaos. Some members were panicking, others were furious, and a few were already on the phone with their lawyers. The company's reputation was at stake, and no one knew how deep the damage went. Every few minutes, a new report appeared, media outlets picking up the story, analysts questioning the firm's credibility, investors demanding answers. And somewhere in a small apartment across the city, I watched it all unfold. I didn't feel joy, not really. Just a strange mix of relief and sadness. The company I had once loved was now falling apart, and even though I knew it wasn't my fault, a part of me still carried the weight of it. I thought about the people still inside, the hardworking ones, the quiet ones, the ones who'd never been given a chance to speak. They were the real victims of all this. But it wasn't over. Not yet. A few days passed, and the chaos only grew. The board suspended all major operations until the investigation was complete. A special committee was formed to review internal records. And at the center of it all, David's name kept appearing. He was under pressure, constantly questioned, barely sleeping. Rumors spread that he might resign. But there was one thing no one knew. This wasn't the full story. What had been revealed so far was only part of the truth. The documents I sent were just the beginning, enough to force attention but not enough to destroy everything at once. There was more, a lot more, stored away waiting. I hadn't planned it this way. But the deeper I had gone into the files, the clearer it became that the corruption wasn't limited to a few people. It was rooted deep, layered through departments, disguised as growth and progress. The company's expansion over the years had been built partly on manipulation, inflated reports, hidden partnerships, quiet deals with people in power. It was bigger than I'd imagined. And as much as I wanted to expose it all at once, I knew timing mattered. One wrong move could hurt the innocent ones, people like Sarah or Clara, or the dozens of employees who had nothing to do with the lies. I couldn't let that happen. So I waited. I watched. Meanwhile, David wasn't the only one unraveling. Within the board, alliances began to shift. Some members distanced themselves from him. Others started pointing fingers, trying to protect their own names. The HR manager who had sat beside him during my termination began meeting privately with the legal team. She claimed she had concerns, long before the email surfaced. Everyone was trying to rewrite their role in the story. In one corner of the company, Clara finally found something, a trace left behind by accident. A file name buried deep within the system, connected to the outgoing message. It wasn't enough to identify me, but it hinted at someone who had access to high-level archives. When she showed it to David, he went pale. That evening, his assistant said she heard him make a phone call. His voice was tense, quiet, almost desperate. "Find her," he said, "before this gets worse." But what he didn't know was that it was already beyond his control. The story had spread too far. Reporters were reaching out to former employees. Whistleblower networks were watching closely. The company had tried for years to silence its truth, but now it was out in the open, and nothing could make it disappear. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't talk to the press. I didn't post anything online. I kept working quietly from home, building a full record of everything. Because I knew this was only phase one. The truth was still incomplete, and when the final piece came out, it wouldn't just be about one company. It would be about everything people like David represented: greed, arrogance, and the belief that loyalty has no value. The tension around me kept building. Some nights I couldn't sleep. Part of me wondered if I had gone too far. I wasn't a hero, just someone who couldn't stay silent anymore. But now that the first wave had hit, there was no turning back. And as I sat there one evening, staring at the city lights, I knew something else. They weren't done yet either. David wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. He would try to fight back. He would look for me. He would want to know exactly what else I was holding. And he'd find out soon enough, because the next email wasn't going to expose the past. It was going to reveal what was still happening right now. And when that truth came out, no one would be able to hide behind silence again. Days turned into weeks, but the tension never settled. The company was now a battlefield of whispers, secrets, and fear. No one trusted anyone anymore. Every conversation was cautious, every email double-checked, every glance over the shoulder filled with unease. It was as if the air itself had changed, heavy, charged with something that couldn't be undone. David's face began appearing on business news channels, each headline sharper than the last. Corporate investigation deepens. CEO under scrutiny for financial misconduct. Internal whistleblower sparks board crisis. His once perfect image was crumbling piece by piece. But behind that cold expression, he was planning something. Everyone could feel it. He wasn't finished. He was angry, cornered, and desperate to regain control. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I didn't go near the building. I didn't speak to anyone from inside. But that didn't mean I stopped watching. Through a quiet contact in the finance department, I kept receiving small updates, the kind people whispered when they were afraid to be caught. Files being deleted, accounts suddenly frozen, lawyers coming in and out of meetings. And through it all, one thing was clear. David was trying to bury the truth before it destroyed him completely. He started holding private meetings late at night. Some of the managers who once avoided him now sat in those closed rooms, trying to save their own names. But not everyone agreed with his approach. The HR manager, the same one who had sat beside him during my firing, had begun cooperating with the internal committee. She had evidence too, small pieces that connected with what I had already revealed. What she didn't know was that I was one step ahead. I had gathered enough proof to make sure nothing could be hidden, even if they tried. One evening, as I was reviewing my documents, an unknown email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Stop before you regret it." No sender name, no signature, no traceable path. Just those words. I stared at it for a while, then closed my laptop. I wasn't scared, but I knew what it meant. David had found out I was still out there. The next day, my phone rang. It was a private number. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, before finally answering. There was silence on the other end. Long, uncomfortable silence. Then a voice spoke, low and steady. "You think you've won." It was him. David. His tone wasn't angry, but cold. Calculated. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. I didn't reply. He paused for a moment, then added, "This company isn't what you think it is. You're not the only one who's been watching." Before I could say anything, the line went dead. That call haunted me for days. What did he mean? I'm not the only one who's been watching. It felt like a warning, but also like a clue. Maybe there were others, people inside or even above him, pulling strings that went far beyond the walls of the company. It wasn't just about corruption anymore. It was about power, and the kind that doesn't like to be challenged. By the end of that week, the board finally called for a public hearing. It was going to be the company's biggest day. Investors, media, and even government officials were going to be there. Everyone expected David to defend himself, to deny the claims, maybe even shift the blame. But what no one expected was that I had prepared something for that exact day. I had been quietly working with someone new, a journalist named Emma. She had been following corporate scandals for years, and when she reached out to me, I hesitated at first. But there was something honest about her. She didn't want fame, she wanted truth. Together, we pieced together the last missing fragments of the puzzle. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. My desk was covered with printed papers, sticky notes, and USB drives. I kept going through everything again and again, making sure nothing was missing. Every click of my mouse echoed in the quiet apartment. I knew this was it. Everything I'd been building toward was about to reach its breaking point. At the same time, inside the company, chaos had turned to paranoia. Clara, the IT expert, discovered that several encrypted files were being accessed remotely, files linked to David's private accounts. She tried to stop it, but her system froze. When she restarted it, she found one strange file that hadn't been there before, a list of names. Employees, executives, board members, and mine. That morning, the building was surrounded by cameras. Reporters shouted questions. Employees tried to avoid them, keeping their heads down. David arrived in a black car, wearing his usual calm expression, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. The HR manager followed shortly after, holding a thick folder of documents. The air was thick with anticipation. At exactly 10 a.m., the hearing began. Inside the large boardroom, cameras clicked as David took his seat. He looked composed, but his eyes darted toward the empty chair reserved for the whistleblower for me. He must have thought I'd show up, but I didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. At 10:05, every screen in that building flickered. For a few seconds, no one understood what was happening. Then, the company's internal monitors began displaying files, the same documents from my encrypted drive, the ones that hadn't been shared yet. Real-time transfers, private messages, false approvals, all proof that the corruption ran deeper than anyone had dared to imagine. David's face went white. People gasped. Some of the board members stood up, shouting, demanding to know where it was coming from. Security rushed to the IT department, but it was too late. The system had been breached from a scheduled link, a timed upload that couldn't be stopped. I watched the live feed from my apartment, my heart pounding. This was the moment everything would change, but even then, I didn't feel triumphant. It wasn't victory I wanted. It was closure. I just wanted the truth to finally exist where lies had ruled for so long. Back at the company, David slammed his hands on the table, shouting for the power to be cut, but nothing worked. The truth had already escaped the walls. Every major media outlet had received the files simultaneously. The journalists were already broadcasting the evidence. Emma had done her part. Outside the building, employees gathered, whispering, checking their phones, realizing that everything they doubted, everything they'd suspected was real. Inside, the boardroom descended into chaos. Some members accused David directly, others denied involvement. The HR manager stood silently, holding her folder close, watching as everything crumbled around them. 4 years, people like her had been silent out of fear. Now, the silence was breaking. And in that exact moment, something unexpected happened. The lights flickered again, and every monitor went black. The room fell into total silence. Then, one message appeared on the main screen, written in plain white letters. "This is not the end." The room froze. David's expression shifted from anger to confusion. He turned to the IT head, demanding to know who had written it, but no one had an answer. The system logs showed no external interference. That was when I realized something chilling. He had been right. I wasn't the only one watching. The company's secrets had reached beyond us both, into hands that neither of us could control. And now, whoever they were, they had decided to step in. As I stared at my own screen at home, reading the same message, a shiver ran down my spine. For the first time, I didn't know what would happen next. I thought I had been fighting a corrupt company, but it was bigger, deeper, and far from over. The truth had finally escaped, but now, so had something else. And the storm that was coming next was one I might not be able to control. The room fell silent again as I closed my laptop. The air was heavier now, almost suffocating. I could feel the shift, the calm before the real storm. I had seen fear in people's eyes before, but this was different. The new boss, Daniel, who had once walked around the office with arrogance and smug confidence, now looked uncertain. He didn't know what I was holding, what I was truly capable of, and that was the one thing keeping me steady. I sat quietly in my chair, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the silence, pretending to type while my mind raced ahead of everything happening around me. For 17 years, I had watched people like Daniel come and go, managers who thought power meant shouting orders, who believed loyalty could be replaced overnight. They never realized that people like me were the ones holding the real weight of the company, the ones who kept it standing even when chaos brewed beneath the surface. Every file, every transaction, every small detail passed through my hands at some point. I didn't just work there, I knew the company better than anyone else. That was my invisible armor. When Daniel fired me that morning without warning, I didn't fight it. I didn't beg or argue. I simply smiled, because while he saw a name on a termination paper, I saw the hidden connections he hadn't discovered yet. I saw the quiet web I had built over the years, the information, the trust, the secrets that no spreadsheet could show. He thought he was cutting off a branch. What he didn't know was that I had roots far deeper than he could imagine. The following days passed in a strange rhythm. I still came to the office, technically on my notice period, and Daniel barely made eye contact. He was busy making his changes, talking about modernization and efficiency, a word bosses love to use when they wanted to hide their ego behind strategy. He brought in his team, new faces, younger, louder, dressed in arrogance. They watched me like I was part of the furniture they were about to move out. I kept my head down, but every click on my keyboard had meaning. There were nights I couldn't sleep. The image of Daniel's smug smile replayed in my mind, but so did the board meeting on Friday, the one they thought I wasn't supposed to attend. That meeting was my turning point. I had gathered everything over the years: reports, proof of mismanagement from past leadership, data trails no one cared to notice. Daniel's first week had been a disaster under the surface, even if he didn't see it yet. And when the board would finally meet, I planned to let them see exactly who they had trusted. But something unexpected started happening around Wednesday. People in the office began whispering. I noticed subtle glances, hushed conversations ending abruptly when I passed by. It wasn't about me, not directly, but something was brewing. The new hires were nervous. The finance department was running unusual audits. Someone had triggered an internal review. That wasn't part of my plan, and it made me uneasy. Then one evening, as I packed my things quietly, I saw a message slide across my screen. It was from an old friend in IT, someone I had trained years ago before he was transferred. It simply read, "Be careful. They're looking into your access logs." My heart skipped. For a moment, my calm cracked. Had they found something? Were they already suspecting I knew too much? I locked my screen, grabbed my bag, and left without a word. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by boxes, 17 years of my life reduced to a few cardboard memories. But beneath those files, in a separate folder on my desk, were the real pieces of the puzzle. The hidden emails, the financial irregularities, the signatures that didn't match, the very things that could turn Daniel's perfect image upside down. My hand trembled slightly as I looked at the folder. I hadn't meant to use it like this, but maybe fate had decided otherwise. By Thursday, the tension in the office was thick. Daniel avoided me completely. He knew I was attending the board meeting as part of my farewell handover, but I could sense his discomfort. Every time I passed his office, he stopped talking. His assistant, usually cheerful, barely met my eyes. It was as if they were all waiting for something to explode. I could almost hear the clock ticking toward Friday. Then the second twist came, something I never saw coming. As I logged into my system that afternoon, I found my access denied. Everything, my email, my shared drives, even my ID card locked out. They had cut me off a day early. A quiet, calculated move. For the first time, a flash of panic ran through me. They were trying to erase me before I could act. I stood there in the empty cubicle, staring at my locked screen, feeling 1,000 thoughts colliding. But then a small, knowing smile crept across my face. Because what they didn't know was that my backup didn't live inside their systems. I had spent years building my own mirror of the company's key data, a private archive. Not for revenge, but for safety. I had seen too many people erased unfairly, too many loyal workers blamed for others' mistakes. I had learned long ago that sometimes survival meant being one step ahead. And now, that step was all I had left. As I left the office, I passed by Daniel's glass cabin. He looked up briefly, his expression sharp, suspicious. For a second, our eyes met, a silent acknowledgement that the game had truly begun. I gave him the same calm smile I had the day he fired me. He didn't return it. He didn't need to. He knew I wasn't broken, and that unsettled him more than anything else. That evening, I received another message, but this time, it wasn't from my IT friend. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about the board meeting." No name, no details. I read it twice, feeling a chill run through me. My instincts told me it wasn't random. Someone inside knew something. Maybe someone else had a plan too, or maybe Daniel wasn't the only one keeping secrets. I closed my laptop and sat quietly, the city lights flickering through the window. The noise of traffic outside faded into a blur as my thoughts raced. The board meeting was tomorrow. I was ready to reveal everything. But now, there was something more, another layer, another player I hadn't seen coming. And for the first time, I wondered if I was the only one holding the cards, or if someone else had been watching me all along. The night stretched on, heavy with questions. Sleep never came. I kept replaying the message, the locked access, the silent glances in the office. Something told me that what was about to unfold at the board meeting wasn't just about my firing anymore. It was bigger, messier, and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And as the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something far more unexpected. The sun rose slowly that Friday morning, but to me, it felt like it was rushing toward something inevitable. My hands trembled slightly as I buttoned my shirt. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, a mix of adrenaline and calm acceptance. 17 years of my life had built up to this day. Every quiet hour, every overlooked detail, every late night I had spent fixing mistakes others made, it all led here. Today, everything would come to light. I reached the office earlier than usual. The halls were quiet, the kind of silence that carries too much meaning. My ID card still didn't work, so I waited until someone else entered and slipped in behind them. People gave me curious looks, a few whispered my name, but no one dared stop me. News traveled fast. Everyone knew today was the board meeting, and everyone knew something was about to happen. When I reached the conference room, the door was slightly open. I could hear Daniel's voice, smooth, confident, rehearsed. He was already inside, presenting his weekly report to the board members. I paused outside for a moment, listening. He was painting himself as a visionary, talking about restructuring, modernizing the workforce, and removing inefficiencies. I almost smiled at the irony. He was calling me an inefficiency. The boardroom was sleek and cold, filled with expensive suits and polished faces. I walked in quietly, and for a second, the room froze. Every eye turned toward me. Daniel's voice faltered, his confident tone slipping for just a heartbeat. "Oh," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I'm still part of this company until the end of the day," I replied calmly. "And I was invited to this meeting. You might have forgotten." One of the board members, Mrs. Patel, gave a small nod. "Let her speak," she said firmly. "She's been here longer than any of us." Daniel tried to interrupt, but I had already connected my USB drive to the projector. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Before you continue with your restructuring plan, I think it's important the board sees what's really happening behind the numbers." The first slide came on, a spreadsheet, simple but loaded with truth. It showed discrepancies in financial transfers, approval signatures that didn't match, expense claims that led back to Daniel's new management team. I clicked again, emails between him and an outside contractor suggesting personal gain. The boardroom went silent except for the quiet hum of the projector. Daniel's face turned pale. He stood abruptly. "This is a breach of confidentiality," he shouted. "She's accessing private data." But before he could say more, Mrs. Patel cut him off. "Sit down, Daniel. Let her finish." I continued, each file opening like a door to another secret. The room grew heavier with every revelation. I explained how he had been redirecting funds under the guise of team restructuring, how several new hires were connected to his previous company, how even the layoffs were designed to cover his mismanagement. When I finished, no one spoke for a long moment. The weight of the truth hung in the air. Then one of the senior board members, a quiet man who rarely spoke, looked directly at Daniel and said, "You fired the one person who could have saved you." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You think you can prove any of this?" he hissed. I leaned forward, my tone calm. "I don't need to prove it. The system already has." I pointed toward the email I had received the previous night, the one from the unknown number. "You should know," I added, "that you weren't the only one being watched." As if on cue, another man entered the room. It was the head of internal audit, followed by a compliance officer. They carried a folder thick with documents. "We've been investigating these irregularities for weeks," the auditor said. Her information confirmed everything. The color drained completely from Daniel's face. The board members exchanged glances. The chairman leaned back, his voice steady but cold. "Mr. Daniel, please hand over your company badge. Security will escort you out." It was over. Just like that, Daniel's eyes met mine one last time. There was no anger now, just disbelief. Maybe he finally realized how easily power can collapse when built on deceit. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. He walked out in silence, the same way I had walked out days earlier when he thought he'd won. The board members turned to me. Mrs. Patel spoke softly. "You could have walked away and stayed silent. Why didn't you?" I took a breath. Because loyalty isn't about serving people in power. It's about protecting the truth. I loved this company once, and I couldn't let it rot from inside. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the projector. Then, slowly, the room broke into murmurs, some shocked, some admiring. They thanked me, offered to reinstate me, even promote me. But I shook my head. "I think it's time I finally start something of my own," I said gently. I left the building for the last time that afternoon. The air outside felt different, lighter, freer. The same office that had once been my second home now looked small compared to what I had carried out with me, peace. I walked past the glass doors without looking back. As I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the same unknown number again. "Well played," it said. "But we both know Daniel wasn't the only one involved." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I typed back quickly, "Who is this?" But there was no reply. Just 3 dots that blinked for a moment and then disappeared. I stood there, staring at the screen, the noise of the world around me fading. For a second, everything that had just happened felt unreal. I had won, or so I thought. But now, this message was a reminder that the game wasn't truly over. Maybe Daniel was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. As I started my car, a quiet determination replaced my unease. I wasn't done yet. Not until I found out who had sent that message. Not until I uncovered the truth that still lingered behind the company's polished walls. And as I drove away, the sun dipped low behind the building that had once defined me. I whispered to myself, half smiling, they had no idea what I was holding. But even I hadn't realized there was still one secret left that could change everything. The evening after the board meeting felt unreal. I sat by my window, the city stretching endlessly before me, lights blinking like distant thoughts. Everything that had happened over the past few days replayed in my mind, scene by scene. Daniel's downfall, the board's silence, that final message from the unknown number. It all lingered like a faint echo I couldn't silence. For 17 years, the company had been my life. And now it was over. Yet, somehow, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't seen coming. I brewed myself a cup of tea and stared at the steam curling up, my reflection faintly visible in the window pane. For the first time in years, I didn't have to set an alarm or plan the next day's tasks. It should have felt freeing, but instead it felt strange. I was so used to being needed that I'd forgotten how to just exist without purpose. The message on my phone still flashed in my mind. We both know Daniel wasn't the only one involved. At first, I had wanted to ignore it, to let it go and close that chapter. But something inside me refused to rest. Over the years, I had learned that silence always hides the loudest secrets. And if I had learned anything, it was that truth has layers. Daniel was only one piece. I wanted to know what the rest of the puzzle looked like. The next morning, I called my old friend in IT, the same one who had warned me before. His voice was cautious, almost nervous. "You shouldn't dig any deeper," he said quietly. "They're already cleaning up after what happened. Some people higher up are scared." That only confirmed what I suspected. "Then they're scared for a reason," I replied. "Send me what you can." He hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. A few hours later, an encrypted file appeared in my inbox. It contained archived communications between certain board members and an outside consulting group. The same group Daniel had secretly funneled money toward. But there was one more name attached, someone I hadn't expected. Mrs. Patel, the very board member who had defended me during the meeting. My heart sank a little as I scrolled through the data. The transactions went back months before Daniel was even hired. It wasn't his plan alone. He was brought in to do the dirty work. He had been a pawn, and when he failed, they let him take the fall. My mind buzzed with disbelief. I had exposed the wrong person, or maybe just one of many. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mrs. Patel's calm, steady voice in the meeting, how she had seemed genuinely protective of me. Maybe she didn't know what Daniel was doing, or maybe she knew exactly what she wanted me to find. The truth didn't feel as clear anymore. And for the first time, I wondered if exposing everything would change anything at all. The next morning, I went for a walk by the river near my apartment. The breeze carried the faint scent of rain, and people passed by, busy with their own worlds. I envied them for a moment. I realized I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't even want answers for myself. What I wanted was closure, something simple, something real. So instead of sending those files to the media or the board, I wrote one last email. It was addressed to Mrs. Patel. I told her I knew. I told her I had the evidence, but I wasn't going to use it. I said I hoped she would make better choices than Daniel did because people's lives depended on it. I hit send, then deleted the files from my system. Not out of fear, but out of peace. Sometimes power comes not from what you expose, but from what you choose to let go. Days passed quietly after that. I found myself settling into a rhythm again. Morning walks, coffee at the same small cafe where I used to go during lunch breaks, and long afternoons thinking about what to do next. A few former coworkers reached out, some to thank me, some to ask what really happened. I told them the truth, but not all of it. Some things didn't need to be said. Then, one afternoon, as I was scrolling through my phone, a message appeared from an unknown number again. "You did the right thing," it said. This time I didn't feel fear, just a quiet relief. Maybe it was Mrs. Patel, maybe someone else. It didn't matter anymore. The story was over, and the ending belonged to me. Over the next few weeks, I started something new, a small consulting firm helping employees understand their workplace rights and document unethical practices safely. I wanted to turn my experience into something useful, something that could protect others who felt powerless. The first few clients came through word of mouth. Then, slowly it grew. I found purpose again, not in revenge or control, but in empowerment. One evening, I got a letter in the mail from the company. It was short, a formal apology signed by the chairman himself. They had reviewed everything and officially cleared my record. There was even a small note thanking me for my integrity. I smiled faintly as I folded the letter and set it aside. It didn't change anything about the past, but it gave it a sense of completion. As months passed, life moved on. The company hired a new leadership team, one that seemed genuinely committed to transparency. I saw their announcement online one morning while sipping my coffee. A photo of the new board flashed across the screen, and for a moment, I thought I saw Mrs. Patel in the background. But I didn't pause. I simply smiled and scrolled past. Sometimes I still think about that day, the moment I was told to pack my things. The humiliation, the confusion, the sting of betrayal. It felt like an ending, but it became a turning point of my life. Losing that job forced me to rediscover myself beyond my title and routine. It showed me how easily people underestimate quiet strength. And it taught me that walking away doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes it's the most powerful move you can make. When people ask what really happened, I tell them this. I was fired after 17 years without warning. They thought they ended my story. But what they didn't know was that I was holding something much stronger than evidence or secrets. I was holding resilience. That resilience built a new life. One where I didn't need approval. One where I no longer chased loyalty in the wrong places. The world can be cruel, but it can also be kind to those who refuse to let bitterness define them. I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's peace. As the sun set outside my window that evening, painting the sky in soft gold, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The company, Daniel, the board, all of it was behind me now, just a chapter in a book I had finally closed. I had lost everything once, but in that loss, I found something far greater, freedom. And maybe that's what the message really meant, the one that started it all, the one that kept me wondering. They had no idea what I was holding. It wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just a plan. It was the quiet power of knowing my worth. And as I sat there, smiling to myself, I realized that was enough.